Hello and welcome to Well Woman. It's Sue Lynn, your hormone health coach, and thank you for tuning in. If you're looking for the latest advice on women's health, food, mood, tips, hacks, and all the hormone things, you've come to the right place. I hope you love this episode. Let's get to the show. So I've been reading, and this is Social Freedom, The Path to Wellbeing by Deborah Devaal, which makes me extremely excited to be telling you that today on Well Woman, we're going to be joined by seasoned art therapist and wellbeing coach and author, Deborah Devaal. And Deborah's going to share some simple and effective tools for all of us to be able to handle stress and overwhelm more effectively. Did you know that there's been a 25% increase in anxiety since COVID? And there are mental health issues on the rise. There is a 3 to 4-fold increased risk of depression for women in midlife. With all of these things going on, from all of that through to urgency culture, we find ourselves, particularly as women, in a place where, there's never been a better time to get creative, literally, about how we handle anxiety and overwhelm and how we improve our emotional regulation. And if there's one thing that I know for sure, being a perimenopausal woman, in perimenopause through to postmenopause for all women, or in fact for all of us, the hormonal changes that are taking place and the changes that are occurring in our bodies and minds as we age, they force us to meet the challenge of change. And within that evolutionary journey, there is this potential to find our true selves again. Emotional regulation and the tools to achieve it are so important for all of us, regardless of our life stage. So I am hopeful that today's interview with Deborah, talking about her work, talking about her approach, will give you those pearls of wisdom that help you to achieve a beautiful, calm, balanced, blissful state of being. Enjoy. I'm delighted to have Deborah Devaal here with me today to give you all the tools and strategies you need to overcome anxiety, overwhelm, fear, and all those crazy emotions we can experience when our hormones are out of balance, or even just when life becomes too stressful. Deborah is an accredited art therapist and well-being coach who's devoted herself to helping us all cultivate self-understanding and emotional resilience in a world where our emotional and mental health can be really challenged. There are so many expectations and so much social conditioning that we grow up with as little people. This can ultimately become disempowering and cause us suffering and even make us question who we are. Deborah's approach is practical. She's an experienced therapist, and in her book, Social Freedom, The Path to Wellbeing, she lays out this roadmap for navigating the ups and downs of life with grace and compassion, and ultimately teaches us how to thrive. She's a mum to 2 beautiful humans, co-creator of the I Am Power Summit. She has a passion for surfing, and her holistic approach to life and healing comes through in her work in clinic with clients, as well as in her writing. Hi, Deborah.
Hello, Celine. How are you?
I'm so well. Thank you for being here today.
It's so nice to see you. And thank you for that lovely intro. It's beautiful. And I'm so excited to be here. I've been a really big fan of your work for a while now. So yes, thank you for having me.
Oh, likewise. And it was so nice to reconnect with you last year. Listeners, if you haven't heard about it yet, the I Am Power Summit was just such a beautiful, transformational, but really educational seminar for women in midlife and actually all ages, wasn't it? And Deborah produced that with Sonia Rivas. So well done on you. I was so happy to be part of that. And Deborah, you're an art therapist. So I think a lot of my listeners are going to be very curious about what's involved in art therapy. And when I hear art therapy, I think, that's so interesting, almost, pardon the pun, but a little bit abstract. because I've been, and perhaps many of you listeners would have been exposed to lots of different types of therapy over the years. Some of them may feel a little more direct. So I'm very intrigued by this concept of using art as a therapy tool. And can you tell us a little bit more about art therapy and also how it would help someone to deal with emotional issues, stress, anxiety, etc.?
Yeah, great question. So I guess art therapy uses art as the main focus of communication. So it can really help make unconscious thoughts become conscious. Um, and what that does, it actually exposes parts of ourselves that we might have not been aware of and that we can then befriend and work with. So it's actually very liberating. It can be very healing and empowering. And it's a really good tool to work with behavioral patterns, and also obviously with thoughts, and letting go of these thoughts that don't serve us and patterns and putting in place things that are serving us much better. So that's the beauty of art therapy. It's really powerful in overcoming obstacles.
Mm. And in your book, Social Freedom, which I've
Mhm.
already explained a bit about and raved about, um, this concept of social freedom, would art therapy make it a little bit easier to access that social freedom, that ability to just connect with the you inside, your nature in a way, without all the words and all the other concepts and, it's getting in the way?
Yeah, I definitely. I think if we have an understanding of our emotions, we can access true freedom. So art
Mm.
therapy really helps in that. It really allows us to access that subconscious where all those things are just lurking beneath the surface.
Mm. It makes me think about one part that I found particularly helpful. This was early on when I was reading through your book, and it was the SFUC
Hmm.
process, which was
Yes.
so well written because, some of these books, we can feel like we need a master's in psychology to actually make sense of things. But it's written in such a way that no matter, who you are or what life stage you're at, or, what your level of exposure to healing and wellness and psychology might be, everything's very accessible. So I love this idea of the SFUC. And I was looking at the part on anxiety. And so
Mhm.
I'm going to bring this up early on because, I want to benefit from your pearls of wisdom just as much as my listeners. For me, when I experience things, emotions like anxiety, I feel like it kind of creeps up on me. And it's usually there is some stimulus, there's like maybe a phone call that I have to make, or a presentation I have to give, or an appointment I have to not forget to go to. Or there's always just that slight sense of tension and urgency around something. And then I'll feel the anxiety coming in. And I wonder if anxiety as an emotion is also partly self generated because I can feel myself going into this mind spin about it. There was a lot in your book that I could relate to. For example, the little bubble of chaos surrounding us, 100% relate to that. Just that sort of negative chit chat in my head when I'm feeling anxiety. So, yeah, I wonder, and then there's kind of trying to push the emotion down just to be able to get through things. So with this idea of understanding our emotions, I think that was a very powerful tool that I took away from your book. And I would love you to talk for our listeners about what the SFUC is, this approach, and how it would help someone like me who faces anxiety when it comes up. What do they do? How do they use this tool?
Okay, yep, absolutely. Anxiety is a very common emotion that a lot of us experience. And I guess, the first thing I would say is like we have to be aware that our emotions are a personal alert system. So, what really is happening when an emotion comes up? It wants us to pay attention to something. And then we take action accordingly. So, instead of pushing it away, if we're feeling anxious, it actually is nudging us to say, hey, there needs to be awareness here. We need to stop and look at this. What is going on here? So, there's signals from our body and mind, and if we ignore that, if we just push on and don't focus on what's actually happening underneath there, we start to eventually have a sense of loss of clarity, of disconnection. So that's why I personally think it's so important that we understand these emotions. And what I've done in the book is I've explained these emotions as simple as possible, so that people can understand, because I think that's a really important part of dealing and regulating emotion is actually understanding what the emotion is. So I'm glad you found it easy to read, because that was the exact idea, that when we're feeling like that, we don't have time or the mindset to read something complicated. So I want you to be able to go to it really quickly and go, okay, this is how I'm feeling, this is why I'm feeling like that, and this is what I can do in this moment to reconnect back to myself. Yeah, because that's what's happening. We're being nudged to reconnect back to ourselves. So um, what we're talking about here is emotional regulation, which I guess is the ability to then manage in a healthy and constructive way these emotions. So, sorry, it's a long intro into what SFUC is. So, the FSUC method is something I designed for my clients that were struggling with anxiety, for example, or any of the other emotions. Just a quick method to be able to, I guess, instantly regulate ourselves. So, what happens with FSUC? The idea is that, say, I'm feeling anxiety in this moment. So, instead of just letting it take over and completely control me, I'm going to just whisper to myself, SFUC or SFUC, because the reason I named it that is because it's easy to remember. And especially with younger people, teenagers that I work with, they love it. It's just like, oh, I get to say something that's almost a swear word, but it's not. So the idea is that you quietly say that to yourself in that moment. Okay, I'm experiencing an overwhelming emotion. Okay, what does it mean? Well, the S stands for stop. Stop and take a deep breath. So that's where we start. So we breathe in, big deep breath, and then we ask ourselves, well, what am I actually feeling? Yeah, so in your case, when you said you were feeling anxiety, you know, how did it feel to you? Can you describe that to me?
It felt very destabilizing, which is often how anxiety plays out for me. And then it's hard to get back to that centered, grounded, sort of robust self. And I'd
Mhm.
love to talk about resilience as well today. I think that's really um, that's something that I'm sure I'm not alone in needing to work on. But
Mhm.
back to your question. So it feels like I'm not here, like I'm not present with the moment. Because if I'm present where I am, and I'm just, as you so articulately described, connecting. So if I'm just in that moment of connection and I'm just allowing myself to be in that moment of connection, the anxiety suddenly doesn't control me anymore, because I'm not worried about any other of the 1 million possibilities of places where I could be, or things that could happen, or responses I could get. So I feel that disconnection, absolutely. And I feel like I'm not living in the present, and like I'm sort of navigating the wild oceans of unpredictability in that moment when I'm feeling anxiety.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good explanation. Thank you for sharing that. So that's how you feel. So that's the F. Yeah. The S is stop and breathe. The F is, okay, how do I feel? So we just examined how you're feeling. So that tells me when if I was to ask if you were one of my clients and you said, look, I've been feeling like this lately, what's happening with me? I would say, well, it sounds to me like you are experiencing anxiety. And the reason I think it's anxiety is because, as you're saying, some of the things you're talking about is you're actually in a lot of time in the future and you're not present. So anxiety is when our thoughts are about future events and we are most likely imagining the worst case scenario. So that is actually what anxiety means. So that is the U for understand, SFU. So when we know that, we understand that, hang on, I'm not being present. I'm feeling like my thoughts are racing or my heart's racing and everything is like a whirlwind. It's because I am actually not here. I am in the present and I'm constantly thinking about future scenarios, worst case scenarios, most likely. And that brings us off balance because when we're
That is
not present,
100% how I feel.
okay,
Yes.
yeah. So when you feel off balance, when you feel anxious, you also lose a lot of your power. Yeah, because your power is, this sort of scattered energy that's in the future and not right here and now. Um, so what we do then, so that was understand. So now that you have a little
Mm.
bit of an understanding of actually what anxiety means, that can make you feel a bit more empowered because, having the wisdom,
Mm.
you now feel empowered. Like, actually, I know what this is. This is not just something that's just going to happen and I have no clue what to do with it. I actually now understand what this is. All it is my thoughts are going into the future and I'm imagining worst case scenario. So now that we know that, then we can put some things in place, tools and strategies that can help us, bring us back to balance. Yeah. So then the next
Mm.
part would be connect. So that's the C. So the stands for connect. And what I mean with connect is this is where we're going to connect back to ourselves with the tools and the strategies that we can use. So again, that's really empowering because we are taking our control back of the situation. It's not just some whirlwind of emotions that's going to take us on this big roller coaster and we just got to ride with it. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to take control back and we're going to put tools and strategies in place that are going to help us in that moment to reconnect to ourselves. So, what I would suggest for you, for example, would be all right, maybe ask yourself some questions like, okay, how can I bring myself back to this present moment? What are some of the techniques I can use? In your case, I would probably suggest maybe try to do some breathing exercises or anything
Mhm.
that you find is
Mm.
grounding to bring you back. Like, in your case, what would you
Yeah,
prefer to do?
absolutely. I would just feel my feet. I find that feeling my feet is usually a really effective way for me to arrive back in my body. And the breath work, I love. Yeah, I love that too. Yeah, I could definitely feel that because I also know when I am in that state that I don't breathe normally anymore. So I think that would be, yeah, really nice, helpful thing to do.
Yep. Yep. So, okay, great. So that would be a really good way for you. Everyone has different things that they prefer. Some people don't prefer the breathing techniques. They might like to go out in nature and go for a walk, or they might like
Mm.
to have a nice warm bath or whatever it is for you that grounds you back in that moment, yeah, to bring you back in the
Mm.
present. Then the next question I would probably ask you is the thoughts that you're having while you're anxious, are they actually accurate? Because a lot of the time when we're anxious and we're imagining worst case scenario, we're actually far away from reality and the truth.
So this is kind of like catastrophizing, or as you said before, imagining the worst case scenario is going to happen. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, when I that kind of I think that was also in your book when I was reading through that part on emotional regulation and understanding our emotions, I was thinking, yeah, when I do get into that state, I'm a little bit I'm off the well, ungrounded is a better way of saying it, but it's like I'm off away from reality now.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense. I
Yeah.
feel
And
like when you're
sorry.
talking, also, this is all emotional literacy, isn't it? But my teenage boy goes to school and learns nothing about emotional literacy. I mean, we learn about all these other I guess we do our English and science and geography and history. So we're quite literate in those areas, hopefully, fingers crossed. But emotional literacy is a whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and it's probably one of the most important things we can learn. Because these emotions, as I said before, they're nudging us to see something, to do something, and we're not supposed to stay stuck in them. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of people these days,
Mm,
especially with, we're being bombarded with so much, at the same time, especially young people. It's so different these days. And I think, these emotions are telling us something, but we're not meant to be stuck in them. We're meant to actually do something with them. And we need to see that and we need to understand that and we need to have things that we can work with in that moment, because that is our opportunity right there and then for personal growth, for building
mm,
resilience, for moving forward, you know. So if we don't have those tools and we keep pushing these things away, we start doing things like numbing ourselves, substance abuse, keeping really busy with work. We look for things to push the emotions away instead of dealing with it. And that doesn't help us grow, doesn't help us reach our potential. It causes a lot of, stressful side effects. Um, so yeah, I think it's really important that we learn how to emotionally regulate ourselves. I think it's one of the best gifts you can give someone because it can truly transform your life.
mm. And sorry, I interrupted you when I was talking about emotional literacy.
That's
Was
okay.
there something that I missed there? I don't want to miss anything.
Um, I don't think so. Well, I think we covered everything on. We did the S, the F, the U, and the
Yes,
C.
and the
So we did
C.
stop.
Yes.
We did the feel. We talked about how you felt. We talked about what anxiety is. So we have that
Hmm.
understanding. And then we
Which
talked
could be
about,
very individual for everybody, couldn't it? I mean, my anxiety will
yes,
look very different to someone next to me.
yep, exactly. How you feel would be
Mm.
different for every person, but it will probably most of the time come back to that same thing. I'm having thoughts about the future and I'm probably imagining worst case scenario. So that tends to be sort of in a nutshell what most of the time anxiety is. So having
Mm.
that understanding hopefully then makes us go, okay, hang on, there's something I can actually do here. I can take some control back. And hopefully that empowers you then to, get off that roller coaster and go, okay, what can I do? And then we talked about, connecting back to yourself. Yeah, being
Mm.
present. And, we looked at, how can you be present? What can you do to ground yourself? And are your thoughts accurate? So that would be what I would work with. If I was working with someone with anxiety, that would be probably the basis of what we'd work with. Because then that will really change the way you can think, feel, and act about things. Yeah, does that make sense? Because you're
Mm.
taking charge now. So it really changes the way you
Yes.
think, it changes the way you feel, changes the way you act. And that acting has a ripple effect on your surroundings as well. So a
Mm.
lot of things can change with that. And that is basically emotional regulation.
I love that. And so, if that's kind of like the emotional well-being aspect, what as an art therapist would you suggest someone does when they're dealing? It doesn't have to be anxiety, it could be anything. Is there like an activity that people could do or just something where they could use the art therapy now to actively work with those emotionals and get that emotional regulation?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that we activate our relaxation response, especially for anxiety. Art can really help so much with, just bringing us back to the present and grounding us. So, um, because a lot of time we're in fight flight. Um, Fight flight is not easy to switch off. a lot of the time. And also activating your relaxation response is actually not that easy. It's not like we can go, oh, I'm stressed. Okay, now I want to be relaxed. It just, it doesn't happen just like that. It's not a switch we can flick. So having things in place, practices in place like art, can be that bridge from one to the other. Yeah, so as we practice art, the relaxation response will kick in and the fight flight will go down. That's the beauty about art. We just can't help it. It just happens. It's like
Mm.
magic. Um,
Mm.
so I think, for reducing the stress in anxiety, um, any type of art obviously is good. Um, but then I guess you're asking me if I can recommend something, an exercise that I guess
Yeah,
anyone could do.
that
Yeah.
would be, yeah, something like that would be amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So probably one of my favorite art exercises that I like to do with my clients, that I'll love to share with you here, is called the hands exercise. So the good thing about the hands exercise is like just about anyone can do it. It's super simple. All you need is a piece of A4 or A3 paper, just a blank piece of paper, and a pen or some pencils, depending on how far you want to go, how much you want to get into it. You can use paints, but I'd start with a pen or pencil. And the reason I love this exercise is because we're going to work with our hands. Yeah, so it's called the hands exercise. Now, they say that the hands are the tools of the tools, which is really great because to me that symbolizes we possess the actual tools to make change in life. So I love that
Mm.
symbol in this exercise. So what this exercise is about, it's about bringing awareness of where we would like to make changes in our lives. So to create change, the first step is we need to actually know what we're looking at. We need to know what do we want to let go and what do we want to keep. So that's the awareness part there. So what do I want to let go in my life? And what do I want to bring into my life or keep in my life? So what we're doing with the hands exercise is we're actually going to do a visual representation of this. Because what happens when we make a visual representation is we can subconsciously and consciously bring that into our lives. A lot of what happens in our lives is subconscious, and our therapy brings the subconscious to the conscious. So it's a bit like a pyramid.
Mm.
Like the consciousness is only the very tip of the pyramid, and most of the pyramid would be our subconscious. Now, subconscious has an immense role in what we do in our everyday life and what we think and how we feel. But a lot of time we're not aware of it because it's the subconscious. So what we do with art, we actually bring it into our conscious, and then we can really work with transformation. So what you need is your A4 or A3 piece of paper. Yeah. You've got your two hands and a pen or pencil. And then what you do is you place your piece of paper vertically. So I've got one here, but I know for the people listening that are not watching, it's going to be a bit tricky. But basically, this is what we're going to do. Can you see that all right?
I can see that perfectly. Yeah,
We're going to
beautiful.
draw our two hands on a piece of paper next to each other. So we put a piece of paper vertically and we draw our hands. Basically trace around it. That's all you're doing. This is a very messy, quick sketch that I did just before we went online. You can probably do it much nicer than that. But that was just a very messy, quick trace around my hands. So you trace around both of your hands next to each other. And when you've traced around your hands, what I would like you to do is take a really nice deep breath and close your eyes. And what I want you to think about is what is it that I would like to let go in my life? What doesn't serve me anymore? What do I really want to let go? And then I would like you to write or draw, whatever you prefer, that in your left hand that you've traced around. So inside that left hand, I would like you to write or draw the things that you would like to let go of. And then when you've finished your left hand, and you've put everything in there, then I would like you to focus on your right hand. And again, I want to take a nice deep breath and really think about, well, what do I want to keep? What is of value in my life that I really like to keep? Or what do I want to bring in even that I don't have yet? And I want you to put those things in the right hand that you traced on your piece of paper. And then you can really go as far as you like. You can just write the words in there, you can do drawings, you can decorate it, you can go all out, and just really enjoy that process. And what's happening in that moment is, you're basically processing as your emotions might come up. Yeah. And as you're writing things down and as you're drawing things, you're basically working with your subconscious, and it's a form of transformation. So yeah, that's sort of what you're doing there. And then when you're completely finished, I would love for you to just sit back and just have a really good look at the work you created. And first of all, be extremely proud of the work you created. It's not about it being a masterpiece. It's about what you feel, the experience you have while you're creating. Art should never be about the masterpiece you're trying to create at the end of it. It's always about how it feels for you. That's the beauty about art therapy. We'd never focus on, how it looks like, is it looking good enough? You're not going to get marked on it. It's all about expressing. So I want you to sit back and just be really pleased with yourself that you've gone through the process, and then have a bit of a think about what emotions have come up for you. And how do you feel about creating these changes? Because you basically said, well, I want to let go of this and I want to bring that in. Now, how do you feel about creating those changes? So that is called the hands exercise.
Thank you, Deborah. A few things came up for me as you were talking then. It's beautiful description of the process. So everybody have a go at this. What came up for me was we were talking a little bit about resilience before, but this sort of activity is something that, regardless of how overwhelmed you might feel, would be really easy. Wouldn't take a lot of effort. And I imagine it would kind of bring up a lot of stuff at the same time, a lot of things to work with. So can you talk a little bit about resilience, particularly for women, and how important it is for women to cultivate that resilience?
Absolutely. I think, yes, absolutely. Resilience is extremely important. And I also really strongly believe, and I probably want to talk about that first before I talk about resilience, because I think they go hand in hand, is accountability and resilience. They go together. In my opinion, I think it's really important that we see them as two things that are interconnected. Because when we cultivate more resilience, we can hold ourselves more accountable. And when we hold ourselves more accountable, we create more resilience. So in that way, as you probably read in the book, I talk a lot about those two together. Because, when we hold ourselves accountable, we can move forward and create changes in life. And as we do that, obviously the resilience is needed for that, but the resilience is also being built at the same time. Because every time we have success in something, that creates more resilience. And then if we look at what resilience actually means, it's our ability to bounce back from challenging situations. So every success builds up that resilience that we know we can bounce back. So I think also the important thing to remember, I think when it comes to resilience, is that basically it's a practice. It's something we need to practice all the time. It's not something that just happens. It's a commitment as well. We need to really commit to building that resilience. And I think we need to also have the awareness that we need to draw our resilience from things, past experience, and look at, I've been through this or that, but that builds my resilience so I can move forward and I can do this. I can do difficult things. I can overcome hard, difficult times. So yeah, that's how I sort of look at resilience. Um, and I think the way resilience connects with the accountability is that when we take that ownership of our behavior, we are completely transparent with ourselves. And transparency is so important for moving forward and building that resilience. You know, we need to really look at reality. What are we dealing with here? You know, what can I do with this? You know, is this for me to carry, or do I let this go? You know, that we talked about before. You know, that resilience is really about, I need to move forward and overcome difficult things, but do I really need to carry everything with me as I do that? What can I let go? I hope that
Mm,
answers your question.
mm. Yeah, the accountability aspect of it, and that we will talk about the Wellbeing Cup as well today. Hopefully, we can get a little bit of a run through of that because I love that model. Yeah, the accountability is an interesting aspect of it that I don't know that everybody thinks about when they think about developing their resilience, whether it's physical or emotional. So that's really fascinating. Um, so let's just say, I mean, I love that activity that you just did. But let's just say you've got someone who kind of is beginning their process of therapy and they're terrified of a blank canvas. Because I'm sure, I mean, I was, as you were describing that activity, I was thinking, I'm going to do this later on. I have a feeling that I'm going to see the inner critic in the left hand. So you have your thoughts about your drawing, but I'll have my thoughts about mine too, I'm sure. Yeah, so I was thinking about that and um yeah, what if you've got someone who just feels so much pressure to be an artist? I mean, they don't need to be, do they? You don't need to have any artistic prowess. You can just let the process unfold and let the lines, develop without trying to place all of these expectations on how good your artwork is.
Absolutely. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people I work with, yeah, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I'm not creative. I'm going to be really bad at this." And like, you don't have to be creative. All you need to be is curious. Be curious. Curious of what's going to unfold for you. You know, how you're going to feel, where it's going to take you. I think a lot of this comes down to, probably when we're in school, we were marked for our art. And I think that's really it's a really sad thing to see because you can't really mark art. Art is an expression. It's different for every person, and it's such a unique expression of your authentic self that there should be no numbers put on that or marks, whether it's good or not, good enough or not. So we tend to put that on ourselves now and say, oh, it doesn't compare to so and so, or it should look like that. And no, it doesn't. You know, it's your art. You don't even have to show it to anyone if you don't want to, you know, but please practice art because it is so healthy for you. It is so good for you. So for people that are a little bit afraid and have that sort of feeling that's holding them back, to be honest, most of the time they're the people that make the most amazing things. But they just didn't know it yet. But for people like that, what I sometimes recommend, because it's so important that you practice art, as we talked about before, it activates the relaxation response and it helps with regulating a lot of our emotions. So, in that case, if you don't want to stand behind a big black canvas and start painting, maybe try something simple like paint by numbers. It's a really good way to start. Paint by numbers, it's relaxing. You don't have to think. You just got to match the little pot to the to the number on the canvas. That's all you got to do, but you're still getting all the benefits of art. Another thing you could do is coloring in. Simple coloring in, fine too. Start there and see how you go. And, as you start to feel more confident, start exploring. But as I said, curiosity, is the main ingredient, just have fun with it. Um, and yeah, and that regular practicing of the art, if you do it a lot, you build up resilience in that way as well. Um, So yeah, I think art brings a lot of joy. It can remove blockages. Sometimes we have blocks and then we start creating art and we start recognizing a lot of ourselves in our art. And it can really open up thinking things and create space for new stuff. So yeah, I think um, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try.
Yeah, beautiful, 100%. And I can actually see you sitting there with your clients and being so supportive of their journey. I can literally see that. So I would love to hear a success story. Some give me an idea. It can be a sort of mishmash of all the different patients and clients that you've seen over the years, but what would it look like for somebody to come in and use art therapy? Um, you know, or how could you describe that process?
Yep. Um, I think for most people, it's a very liberating experience. But I think, especially in relation to this podcast, I guess for women going through midlife awakening, it can be. I have worked with quite a few women in midlife awakening, and I find, especially for them, it seems to be such a, as we talked about before, that reconnecting to self. That finding that space, where you feel powerful again, where you feel in control, but at the same time, you're expanding and you're exploring. So it's like a playground of exploration. And I think, as we talked about before, it removes a lot of obstacles. So some of the women I've worked with that are, for example, around the age of 50, often, going through children leaving home or changes in relationship or just feeling like they've lost themselves. Um, Often it's a really good way to find yourself again because what you find in your art is a reflection of who you are. And when you see that, it's like, oh wow, I'm still here. That's me. I've never really gone anywhere. I'm still right here, Um,
Mm.
and it's really grounding, it's peaceful, especially when you're creating that time for yourself, which a lot of women find really tricky to do. But when you set time aside for art, you're giving yourself permission to have that time just for you to connect, to ground, and you find that peaceful balance that a lot of us are looking for. So I see that that's been really helpful for a lot of women. Um, Often it also especially when I work with these clients in art therapy, it's first they connect with the art. It takes a little bit of time and then they settle into it and they soften up and then they open up. And then it becomes much easier to talk about what's going on and what emotions they're experiencing. It's almost like a little gateway, it's that bridge that opens up, you know.
Yeah, and is there I mean, do you would you always do drawing or painting or paint by numbers? Would you use other media as well as part of art therapy?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, you can, for example, use clay or even Play-Doh. Play-Doh is
Oh,
really good because it's
wow.
not that messy. A lot of people
Yeah,
don't,
that's a
don't
great
have clay.
idea.
Just use Play-Doh. If you just want to have the fun without the mess, use Play-Doh. Um, we can use, for example, my one of my favorite art exercises to do is I love working with driftwood and paints. So I love painting driftwood. That's just my thing. You can do. It can be making a collage. It can be making a sculpture. You can go collect things that you find on the beach or in the forest and create something out of it. It can be finding leaves and covering them in paint and stamping them on pieces of paper. Like there's so many different things we can do with art. But clay is good fun too.
I would, I mean, is there a particular clay exercise you could describe that, what you would do with the clay?
Yep, yeah, we can do that. Actually, there's one clay exercise that I really love because it's called the transformation pot. So that would actually work really well with what we're
Yes,
talking about here.
100%.
We all love a transformation. Um, and, in this case, again, like, using Play-Doh is great. It's really, most of us will have hopefully some Play-Doh in the house. And if you want to go a little bit further, use proper clay, and, the quick drying clay is good. And what you do with the transformation pot is, I'll explain first what it's about. So what we try to achieve in the transformation pot exercise is we're looking at basically letting go of preconceived ideas. That is the real, in a nutshell, what the transformation pot exercise is about. So letting go of preconceived ideas, because when you work with clay, you'll find that even though you feel like you can mold it in all sorts of shapes and forms, it actually has restrictions, and clay will teach you that very quickly. It can always actually be quite frustrating to work with clay, because you think it's going to look like something, and most of the time it doesn't. So it's really teaching us that, especially for the perfectionist in us, and I'm looking at you, Celine, it's
You got me.
with clay, you have to let go, and you have to work through that. You have to build that relationship with the clay, where you're basically saying, okay, I know you're not going to let me do what you want me to do, what I want to do, but how far can I go? And eventually, you're going to find, and I guess, an between you and the clay, where you're going to have to just be happy with it. But as you're doing that, it is so grounding, which is so good, especially when we're struggling with things like anxiety, because when you're dealing with clay, you're working through your fingertips. Yeah, you're basically touching earth. Yeah, and it's the most grounding, beautiful thing. It's very connecting. So yeah, I think and the same thing again when we talk about anxiety, when we have these ideas of what's going to happen in the future, clay's teaching us, no predictions here. It's going to be what it's going to be. And when you create a transformation pot, it could be a very ugly pot, but that's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter. So creating a clay pot is super easy, because all you do basically is you create a sort of a circle for the bottom, and then you start making these little strips, and you're a bit like building a bird's nest. You basically make these long strips, and then you start layering them on top of each other, on top of your circle. So you're starting to create the wall of the pot. Yeah, this is like building a little bird's nest. And then you can just keep going and going and making it high and as big as you like. There is no rules for this. It's just absolute freedom. It's like playing in a sandpit. You go for it and you make whatever you want. So same with the clay. If you want to, you make your pot the way you want to make it. You can even make a lid for it if you want. And so as you're working through this exercise, you're learning to let go. Yeah, and you're learning to build a relationship with something that has its own personality, which clay does. And when you're creating this pot, I guess, we talk about, you're grounding yourself, you're relaxing. And then when you're finished making your pot, the idea is that the things that we talked about before, how you said you wanted to bring things into your life. Yeah. We want to bring things in that we put into our right hand, or things we wanted to keep, things that are important. You can write them on little pieces of paper, or you can make little pebbles out of your clay and write them on that and put them in your transformation pot. So that's your transformation pot.
I love that. I mean, that would help with the inner critic, the attachment to outcomes, expectations, and that process within itself is not about producing something that's decorative. It's about the healing process in motion. It's underway. Yeah, I really love that. We've actually got some clay downstairs, so maybe I'll have to have a tinker somewhere in the garage, buried in behind old magazines. I'm sure there's some clay in there. Actually, one of my favorite things, I actually love going out and collecting leaves and then painting the back of the leaf and pressing it onto paper and making all these designs with the leaf. All the, the veins in the leaf, the venation creates such beautiful patterns. I used to do a lot of that stuff with my boy when he was like 5 or 6. Yeah, so many beautiful things. I guess, it's just limitless possibilities for ways you could work with that.
Absolutely.
So that's great. Thanks for running us through that, because I think a lot of people find that really useful. And even if they don't have clay or Play-Doh, they'll have something they can mold, right? They could go down to the beach and start to build a sand castle, or they could go out into the garden and grab some soil from the garden and start to create something. Because, yes, 100%. Whenever I've tried to mold something physical and tangible, doesn't always look the way I want it to look. I think my son at primary school did a much better job of his clay chicken than I ever would have been able to do. Yeah, so inspiring. Thank you for running us through that.
That's
So,
okay.
could we come to your really beautiful book, Social Freedom? And maybe just looking at the title of your book, could you explain what you mean by social freedom?
Yep. So social freedom is a state of mind, yeah, where you can be yourself, you can say what you think, you can handle social situations easily, you feel like you can connect with other people well, you set your boundaries easily, and you feel like you can express what you need. So it's basically about feeling good about yourself.
Mm. And so, in your book, as part of achieving social freedom, getting to that point, you've got this model, the Wellbeing Cup, or this process. I'm not sure how best to describe it. Um, could you describe the Wellbeing Cup for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, when we look at the Wellbeing Cup and we look at social freedom, um, I'll tell you a little bit about how they connect first. So you have the listeners might have a little bit better understanding how social freedom and well-being connect together. So, because social freedom, is about obviously being yourself and feeling good about it. That's why I called the book that, because in my work especially, that is so important. That's what we strive for. That's what I strive for with my clients, to really connect to that authentic self, because when you can be yourself, you can experience immense freedom. That's when we find that inner peace, being yourself unapologetically, can't even say it. And that's, where we also can grow. So well-being, and the well-being cup is about well-being, living a life of well-being, and working through the well-being cup. It's about finding contentment and harmony in most areas of your life. So at one side, we're looking at, okay, I can be my authentic self and I can feel good about myself. And on the other side, in the well-being, we're looking for harmony, inner peace, creating a meaningful life, and feeling fulfilled. So that's the well-being side, and then the social freedom side. So when you combine those two, you can create a beautiful life, and you can really reach your full potential and create those dreams, that dream life you're living off. So that's why my book is called Social Freedom, The Path to Wellbeing, because I
Mm.
combine those two throughout the book. So what we're basically looking here is then um, using the Wellbeing Cup to create that life of well-being. Um, so the way to explain the well-being cup best would be, you imagine your well-being as a cup. Yeah. And this cup is all about creating a deeper connection to ourselves. It's about embracing and actualizing our dreams and full potential. So that's what the cup symbolizes. Um, so this cup in the book, we're talking about the 7 stages in the cup. So this cup fills and empties depending on how we're feeling through our emotions. So, for example, if we feel anxious, we might drain our cup a little bit. Yeah, our well-being gets a bit lower. But if you're being fully present, if you're practicing those things we talked about, those grounding, breathing exercises or being out in nature, we actually fill our cup. Yeah. So that's like that. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you might be draining it. But if you're feeling like you're in control of life, you'll be feeling it. So the more your cup fills, the more you feel fulfilled and good about yourself. Now, the more your cup drains, you feel depleted, you feel disconnected from yourself, from the people around you. So when our cup drains, we are not in alignment with our true self. And that's what we talk about a lot when we're working through the 7 stages. So when you're not in alignment with yourself, you're not experiencing social freedom, because social freedom is about being your authentic self and feeling good about yourself. So that's how those two go hand in hand. So when we focus on our well-being, we look through the cup, through the 7 stages of the cup, we look for the opportunities for personal growth by working through the 7 stages. Um, what we're doing there is, as we're working through the 7 stages, which also at the same time covers the 7 emotions that we talk about in the book, what we're looking is for this really delicate balance. It's all about finding that balance, which would be similar to what you're doing in your work, I can imagine, is finding that balance, letting go what no longer serves us, and bringing in the new experiences that are going to support our transformation. So, like we talked about in some of these exercises, bringing in the new stuff and letting go of the things. And then we're trying to create this balance. So, that is basically what we do throughout the book, through those, as we work throughout those 7 stages. Does that answer
Yeah, that's
your
that's
question? Yeah.
beautifully explained. And also that brings me back to something I absolutely loved about your book when you were talking about how the emotions line up with the well-being cup. And then, so if you are experiencing a certain emotion, this is giving you the pathway to transforming that emotion into something a little bit better,
Yes.
something
Yes.
more positive. Yeah, I thought that was beautiful the way you brought it all in together. And you've obviously been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite a while. Yes.
I'm wondering how long was the book a work in progress? How long did it take to bring this into the world?
So the idea for the book, probably, well, to start with, it actually wasn't a book. So to start with, it was just really, every time I was working with clients, I was, some of the things I just explained to you, like the SFUC method or some of the other tools and strategies I use with my clients, I would find myself drawing them and writing them out on pieces of paper so they could take it home and then, look at them during the week and practice them. And then we'd go back into our next session and, we'd build resilience that way. So after a while, I was like, I need to put all these things in one place so I don't have to keep rewriting and redrawing the same thing. So that's how the idea for the book sort of came together. Because when I put that all together, some of my friends and family started asking, well, can I have some of that too? Because I think it would be really useful, even people that weren't my clients. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I need to make it look a little bit better than just a stack of pieces of paper stapled together. And then I thought, actually, this could be a great opportunity to make something that, I guess appeals to people to pick up and read and encourage them to really practice these things. And so that took altogether about 3 years to the whole process from I've worked with an artist as well who's done a lot of, as you probably saw,
I
the front
loved the
cover.
artwork. Loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, loved it. I'm going to put for anyone who's viewing this podcast, I'll put just me flipping through the book, and yeah, the artwork is beautiful because I was quite intrigued in how it was working with an art therapist working with an artist who's wanting to communicate the thoughts of the art therapist. I thought that was a
Yes.
really interesting dynamic.
I didn't actually think of it like that, but now that you put it like that, yes, and he did a great job,
He did,
and
yeah,
he really
100%.
understood everything that I said. So it was, yeah, it was a beautiful process. It was, yeah, it was a long process, but it was very rewarding, and I'm really pleased that it's out and people can enjoy it and use it, and hopefully it's useful.
Oh, absolutely. It has been to me. And I would suggest to all of you listening to get this book. And also, don't worry about it being an overwhelming process because the way that it's laid out is Deborah walks you through it all. and next we're going to look at this, and then we're going to do this. And so I felt almost like you were reading it to me. I could hear your voice in my head, taking me through from section to section, and each section's a kind of bite-sized. So yeah, I love that. And I love the well-being model particularly. So on that line, um, with with everything that you're doing, what do you think that we are all striving towards achieving when we work on our well-being? And I mean, what in life do you think people are striving to get?
That's a big question. What a great question.
I mean, what's at the end of all this
Yes,
beautiful evolution work?
I think, I guess what we're all striving for is emotional balance and fulfillment, a sense of fulfillment. I think, I guess that would be, what I would hope most of us will experience, because that's where freedom lays, that's where it's peaceful. And I think we can all use that. And I think, you know, what that looks like on a day-to-day basis would be a sense of mental clarity and just being happy with ourselves. I think that's sort of how it would feel. That's how it feels to have that sense of fulfillment and emotional balance. And we do that obviously through the emotional regulation, which I can talk about a little bit more if you feel that I haven't explained that enough yet. So, um, and I think, the way we can achieve that, because it is achievable. I think it is achievable for everyone. And as we talked about before, unfortunately, we're just not being educated about it enough. And a lot of time not in an easy, understandable way. Because when we are feeling like that, we often don't have the capacity to read complicated materials. We want an easy explanation. We want practical tools that we can apply straight away. So I think the best way to achieve that then would be um, obviously read the book. That would help to start with. But if not, make sure you equip yourself, with the right tools and practices that support you on a daily basis. So this is daily work in my opinion. This is daily work. We need to have tools and practices in place for every day. Um, because when we have that and we understand what we're working with and we feel we can grab these tools and we know we're going to do this practice every day, we're going to feel empowered. It becomes our new way of living, and it then opens up all these opportunities for us to look for personal growth. And as we do that, we build up that resilience, what we talked about before. And then we start to really believe, like, hey, I'm capable of creating pretty much anything I want. I can change my life in any way I want. Um, and that's a beautiful place to be in. It's really, I think, what we're ultimately here for. Because when we are in that space and when we are happy about ourselves and we're creating this beautiful life for ourselves, we're not only creating a beautiful life for ourselves, but I think we're also creating a ripple effect that makes the world a better place. So I guess to answer your question, I think that would be, you know, what we're ultimately striving for.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So if you don't mind, do you have anything else that you can share about emotional regulation?
Um, yeah, I'm happy to go through, I guess maybe explain emotional regulation a little bit better. Because I think a lot of the time we feel really influenced about true external factors. Like we really feel like we don't actually are in control. We really feel that our emotions are ruled by circumstances. And I think understanding emotional regulations really helps us see that no, actually, it's not. I can actually be in control of this. So even though I can't basically control what's happening around me, I can control the way I react. And I think it's important to understand um, because, as we talked about before, that's where we feel that peacefulness. That's where we feel that balance and that freedom. So we talked about before is that, our emotions nudge us to do something. They're saying, hey, pay attention. There's something happening here.
Mm.
I don't want you to be stuck in this. I want you to deal with this so we can move on and grow. So emotional regulation is the ability to manage and respond healthily and constructively. So, for example, if you feel really angry at something that has happened around you, um, we can say, well, where can I take accountability? Where can I take accountability and take my power back? You know, where can I find ways here to grow? Where can I find ways to move forward and leave something behind, but gain something at the same time? So I think when we learn that we can't control the external factors around us and how society treats us, what happens in social media, triggers in our daily lives, we can control how we respond to our emotions. Um, and I think it's really important that we also practice a lot of self-compassion for what we're all going through, because we often feel we have to do everything alone. And, there's so much ask of us, and especially women in midlife, we tend to, for some reason, take on even more. Like I'm turning 50 in a couple of months' time, so I know exactly you know, what it feels like. Is like, you feel like you need to do
Mm.
everything, and we don't, um, you know, we need to be present. That's what we really need to do. That's the number one thing we actually only need to do is we need to be present. And then we can regulate, and then we can deal with what's being thrown at us in a really
Mm.
constructive and manageable way. And instead of losing our power and losing our balance, we're regaining that balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's so interesting, and I loved what you wrote in your book about anger too. When we feel angry at something, and we kind of tune into that, maybe it's because someone's doing something that we didn't want them to do, or something didn't meet our expectations. What about sadness? The emotion of sadness. Maybe even if we kind of circle back to the SFUC model or approach, how would you explain or give me an example of someone who's dealing with depression, flatness, apathy, sadness, and what they might experience when they're using the SFUC?
Yeah, okay. So when you're sad, often we tend to confuse sad and anger. Like we tend to think they're the same thing, but they're actually not. So sadness is basically to explain. So okay, let's do the SFUC. So say you're feeling really sad. You're
Mm.
feeling that emotion. You stop and you really feel, okay, how am I feeling? All right, I feel like crying. I don't know what to do. You feel um, like you're stuck, like there's just no forward movement there. So then we try to understand, okay, why am I feeling like this? Well, I'm feeling sad. What is feeling sad? Feeling sad actually is when we have not achieved the outcome or things have not turned out the way we thought they would be. So we're now grieving for that. So that really is what sadness is. And if you happen to come across anything in the next week or so where you feel sad, have a look at that and see, is that what's happening? Because most of the time you'll find that is exactly the only thing that is happening is I was
Mm.
expecting this to be something else and it's not what I thought it was going to be. So, for example, if you look at a relationship, when a relationship falls apart or a marriage breaks up, we often, feel so sad because we thought it was going to be forever, or we thought it was going to be like this or that. And the fact that it's not what we thought it is, that's where the grief is. That's the part that we're grieving for, but that's also the part that we have to let go. Because again, we need to check back in with reality and be present, because it's not what we thought it was, because it's not. So that's where that understanding comes in. And once we have that understanding, we can have that acceptance. And when it comes to sadness, acceptance is a massive part of that. When we can accept and we can work through the emotion, on the other side of sadness is contentment. Content with it's okay. It is what it is in the here and now. I'm present. This is what I'm dealing with. and I can be content with this.
Yeah, you have a beautiful way of explaining these, and I can relate to all of that. Well, on that note, Deborah, it's been wonderful having you here. I feel like I've had an amazing therapy session. I've built my emotional literacy. So much to think about. So I believe that it's not just me that will be resonating with what you're saying, but lots of women will be resonating with it as well. Lots of my listeners. And if they want to learn more about you, if they want to follow you on the socials and all that, I'm going to put all the links down below. Where can they get your book from if they want to start reading?
It's on my website. You can order it through my website, and I will write you a personal little message in the front if you like.
Yes.
When you order, I always love doing that. You got your yes.
Got mine. I love that. Such a beautiful touch.
Yeah.
I love it. And you also mentioned right at the beginning when you were talking about younger people, youths, and kids who love working with the SFUC for obvious reasons. Do you do any workshops for youth or for younger people?
Yeah, so at the moment, I work one-on-one with people through my coaching and our therapy. So I work online, so it can be with anywhere in the world, which is fantastic how that's possible now. And you can contact me through my website if you'd like to work with me. And the program I've been running for the younger people, teenagers and young adults, it's called Bridge to Belonging, which is really close to my heart. It's where I create a safe and non-judgmental space for young people to express emotions, but also where we develop the skills like we talked about before, to express, your needs, improving self-worth is a really big thing that we work on because that's often a problem at that age as well. And it's just something that is really important right now that we help these young people develop those skills so that they can go out there and, be their best version, you know. So yeah, and these programs can also tailor them to adults, which I have done in the past as well. So if there's adults that feel they need that, I can work with that too. So yeah, so that's where you can find me.
And then
Through my
women,
website.
people can also just come straight to you directly, can't they? Book an art
Yes.
therapy session with you or book a consultation. Yeah, you will then take them through all of this based on their individual case.
Yes, it's all personalized. Yeah, definitely. So yes.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so appreciative of you giving me your time today. And there's just so much wisdom in what you've been saying. And yeah, I'm very grateful on behalf of all you beautiful listeners. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really my pleasure to be here, and thank you for asking me.
If you're wanting to get hold of a copy of Social Freedom for yourself, you can buy it on Deborah's website, which is www.devaldesign.com.au. Deval is spelled Deval, design.com.au. And you can also find Deborah on Instagram. Her tag is Deborah Devaal. Again, Deborah, Deborah, Devaal. And she's on Facebook too, Deborah.Devaal. And yes, if you want to work with Deborah, head to her website, click on coaching, and you can book your one-on-one sessions with her there. Thank you for listening to the Well Woman podcast. The information, opinions, and advice in this podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice, and it's for general information and educational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast may not always be those of the host. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon in another episode of Well Woman.